During a winter night handover, it meant something we do not have a field for. They drill one rule into you in neonatal resuscitation: no heart sounds and no electrical activity after sustained, correctly delivered efforts means stop. In the neonatal unit at the University Clinical Center in Gdansk, I have lived inside that rule for over 15 years, first on the transport team, then as a charge nurse on nights. The rule is not written in poetry. It lives in the metronome of compressions, the clicks of syringe pumps, the fan in the ventilator base, the flat line when it refuses to lift. It was late autumn, the kind that makes every corridor hum with dry heat and wool, when the call came from labor. Meconium, non-reassuring tracing, emergency section. Our team moved on muscle memory, radiant warmer on servo, neonatal crash cart checked, suction canisters seated, laryngoscope battery tested against the wallboard. The pleth monitor, booted with that brief green sweep, then settled to the idle baseline that looks like a coastline drawn by a steady hand. The infant arrived dusky and slack under swaddled towels. APGAR tallies are for forms. In the room, we count by actions. Dry, position, clear. Then the easy things do not help and the hard things arrive. Mask seal corrected. Peep valve up a notch. No chest rise. We escalated to intubation. The laryngoscope blade brought the cords into view. Tube advanced to mark. Colorimetric detector remained lavender. We pulled back, advanced again, listened, ventilated, reassessed. The detector finally turned and held, and still the chest felt like a closed book. I watched the radial site while the resident listened for heart sounds. Nothing at the wrist, nothing at the chest. We began compressions in that small diamond of a thorax, where 2 fingers can feel like too much hand for too little frame. The monitor showed an angry flatness with occasional noise that was not a rhythm. The ventilator delivered measured breaths through the tube with a soft bellows hiss. The pleth channel had not yet been clipped in. We left it off to keep the field clean. Time is counted by tasks when a clock would only hurt you. Epinephrine was drawn, dose confirmed aloud, umbilical venous catheter set with sterile hands that learned long ago how to move without shaking. The line flushed with ease and took the push. We cycled through ventilations and compressions, switched rescuers, adjusted depth. Chest wall compliance was poor at first and then seemed to yield, but there was no sound under the stethoscope. The ECG leads never offered anything a cardiologist would claim. Syringe pumps ticked as we started dextrose and a maintenance line for when maintenance would matter. The radiant warmer held steady skin temperature on the probe at the right abdomen, servo light unblinking. Labs were drawn for a gas that would print out a truth we already knew but would have to record anyway. The ventilator screen gave us tidal volumes that looked acceptable for the tube size and the leak we estimated by feel. Nothing moved inside the numbers that should move a heart. We crossed the threshold past which NRP ceases to be a ladder and becomes a wall. The obstetric team had gone quiet. The unit door clicked open and closed with each necessary entry. Our door counter under the lintel climbed without anyone glancing at it. I stood at the head, eyes moving between the end tidal trace and the chest, then the midline of the monitor, then the small jaw that kept its difficult promise to stay open for air. We changed nothing and then changed everything we could. Second dose given. Ventilator adjusted for a slightly longer inspiratory time. The blood gas returned on thermal paper. Severe acidemia. Carbon dioxide piled high, oxygen low despite us. The relationship between those numbers and life is not optional. The paper curled into a small roll on the warmer shelf as if it had decided to make itself smaller in the room. There's a place where protocol meets mercy. We arrived there and looked for agreement without looking at each other. The resident listened again. I listened as well. Silence does not need consensus, but we sought it anyway. We reduced our hands, then removed them. Ventilator off. Warmer still on because we do not cool anybody to 0 in this unit, not even in endings. Time of cessation recorded. The room exhaled. We began the aftercare steps that keep the institution aligned with itself. Line dressings secured to prevent bleeding. Tube left in place pending documentation. Parents were being prepared down the hall by someone kind who would not add a single adjective that did not serve them. I cleaned the monitor leads with saline, coiled them to return to inventory. The resident filled the first fields of the form, whose boxes it is my job to make honest. Only then did I reconnect the pleth finger probe. Habit, respect. It is how I close a rhesus bay. I return every device to the position it belongs in. The clip was warm from my glove and cold in the air as I slid it onto the infant's right hand. The monitor woke that channel with its thin line and a soft chime indicating sensor contact. I looked, expecting the harmless noise a dead limb makes when light meets tissue. The pleth moved. It was small at first, a shallow undulation like a tide seen from too far away. Then it grew with a shape I know the way a pianist knows a major scale. Rise, peak, dichrotic notch mocked in miniature, fall, bass line. The device did the one thing it does when perfusion is present. It believed. There were no heart sounds. The ECG was unpersuaded. The pleth printed pulse anyway. The rule says a flat chest and a flat ECG tell you what is true. The rule does not ask the pleth to testify. But the pleth testified. I put a hand to the chest once more, as if my palm might become another sensor. Nothing. I watched the waveform trace a second cycle, then a third, while the room held to its stillness. The infant had not moved. The ventilator remained off. Yet, the photodiode sent back light that implied blood, and the algorithm drew a beat. We teach our juniors not to chase artifacts. We catalog them: motion, ambient light, poor sensor contact, cold hands, venous pulsation masquerading as arterial truth. I checked each one. The room lights were stable. The sensor sat flush. I shifted it to the foot. The line paused, then returned in step with itself. I placed it on the other hand. The pattern persisted, but the pleth did not match silence. I did not call anyone back into the room. I stood with the monitor and made a record. I hit print. Thermal paper fed out a thin ladder of light waves, each rise and fall separated by a steady span. The device tried to assign a rate, failed to lock, and kept drawing. I saved the strip in a plastic sleeve and logged the time against the earlier entry. Then, I began the audit I have taught to others for years. First, source control. I powered the ventilator fully down and unplugged it from the wall to remove any motor hum that could travel through the bed. The pleth did not flatten. I paused both syringe pumps. The ticking stopped. The pleth continued without hesitation. I lifted the hand with the sensor and cradled it in air to unload the mattress. The waveform kept its rhythm. I returned the hand to the sheet and moved the clip to the opposite limb. The line paused for a breath length, then picked up the same shape. Artifact likes motion. This device drew through stillness. Second, confirm what the pleth cannot tell you. I placed the stethoscope at the left chest border and listened through full minutes of warm air and remembered noise. No heart. I slid the bell lower. No change. I pressed my fingers at the brachial, then the femoral. No pulse met me. I put the end tidal module back in line without breaths delivered and watched for rise. The trace lay flat as a horizon. If carbon dioxide were leaving, the sensor was not aware of it. Third, look with ultrasound. Our unit keeps a small portable machine on a cart near the central desk. I wheeled it in, gel on probe, and aligned the parasternal view with practiced hands. The screen filled with the grayscale chambers I know better than most of my friends' faces. There was no squeeze. Valves rested. No pericardial collection to press the heart silent. I froze a clip and saved it to the patient drive with the timestamp. I moved to the subcostal window and saw the same absence. I placed the probe at the carotid level and engaged color. No flow painted the vessel. The ultrasound told a simple story. No mechanical activity. Fourth, test the head. Near-infrared spectroscopy monitors are not coded for this moment, but they look at tissue oxygen in places where fingertips cannot. I placed the pediatric sensor on the forehead and waited for calibration. The reading came up unstable and low, then showed a fine oscillation that tracked nothing I could match to a breath or to the room. I saved a screen capture. It was not proof of life. It was not proof of artifact. It was a measurement that refused to sit perfectly still. Fifth, a second gas. I drew a heel sample because the umbilical line would not tell me anything new that mattered, but the act would close a loop I did not want open. The analyzer ran and printed hours after the first. Severe acidemia persisted, oxygen low, carbon dioxide elevated but lower than the first sheet, as if the body had been rode hard and set down. These values do not resuscitate a heart. They do not make a pleth wave on their own either. By then, the attending had returned from a delivery next door, and Risk called me from the desk because my record had crossed a trigger phrase. I laid out the steps in order: cessation recorded, devices off, pleth wave observed, artifacts excluded by standard checks, ultrasound motion absent, Doppler silent, near-infrared noisy, second gas consistent with death. We are careful with words in moments like these. I used plain ones and wrote them twice. Biomedical engineering arrived with a tool bag and the demeanor of people who neutralize claims by isolating power supplies. They checked ground, leakage, and lead integrity. The pleth probe tested within spec. The monitor passed its self-check. The engineer suggested that ambient light sometimes fools the photodiode. I capped the sensor with foil in my palm, creating darkness under the clip. The waveform declined, as expected, then returned when I removed the cover. Light alone would not carve such a stable sawtooth over many minutes. He watched as I moved the probe between limbs. He did not contradict me. He also did not endorse a conclusion. We live by checklists, so I set a new one on paper and walked it item by item. Bed off external power, done. Ventilator off, done. Pumps off, done. Probe rotated through hand, foot, other hand, done. Ambient light occlusion test, done. Ultrasound hard and carotid. No motion, no flow. End tidal, flat. Repeat stethoscope, silent. Near infrared, low and unstable with small oscillation. Second gas, acidemic, hypoxic, hypercarbic. While I worked, the pleth line marched on across the screen, indifferent to the care with which I crossed out its easy excuses. The infant's skin cooled under the warmer's hold, which kept its number steady even as the body beneath it gave up heat. The door counter clicked once as engineering left, then again as the attending stepped back in with the head of service behind him. I handed over the printed strips, the ultrasound clips, and the gas slips. Nobody spoke over anyone. Nobody added weight to words that could not hold it. I returned to the mother's chart to ensure every field would align later with what we had just done. Gestation, course, section indication, time to airway, drug doses, response. The data a defense expert will one day read without our faces attached. I included the pleth anomaly in the narrative section with times and positions of the probe and the corrective steps taken. A device log will store much of this on its own, but logs get lost. The note must carry the story when the machine cannot. We agreed to observe without further intervention for a defined span. I set a timer on my watch to end any drift into endless waiting. The pleth continued through it. The waveform did not degrade to noise. It kept its cycle, slightly irregular in height, regular in spacing, as if a small river had found a way around a dam we could not see. At the end of the span, the attending listened again. He heard what I had heard. Nothing. He watched the ultrasound in my saved clips and then placed the probe himself. The heart remained stone. The carotid resisted color. But ultrasound silence did not match a pleth that kept counting. We covered the body respectfully and moved the bed to the quiet room reserved for this part of a night. I carried the monitor along because the witness object was still testifying, and I am not built to ignore testimony, even when it makes me uneasy. In the quiet room, with no pumps within reach, no ceiling vents loud enough to vibrate a cable, no traffic under the floor, the waveform persisted. I changed the probe to a fresh sensor from an unopened pack. The line paused, then resumed, a little smaller, then taller again. I took another printout and dated it. Risk management asked for an incident entry. I wrote that too. I kept the language tight, observed pleth pulsatility following recorded cessation, repeated across limbs and sensors, persisted beyond the span one would expect with venous artifact, absent correlation with heart sounds, electrocardiogram, ultrasound motion, carotid flow, or end tidal signal. I added that the cerebral near-infrared sensor showed low readings with minor rhythmic variation. I did not ascribe cause. We briefed the parents with the attending leading and me at the back, hands still, eyes on the floor when they needed privacy. I did not mention the waveform. They needed facts that would not change when a device became part of the story. We offered to keep the infant in the quiet room until they were ready. We offered memory prints and a lock of hair. Our service does this with care, and we did it with care that night. After they left, I returned to the monitor and found the pleth line finally flattening. It softened like a tide at slack water. It did not stop at once. It stepped down, then up, then smaller, then brief, then a low tremor that the algorithm no longer called a pulse. I let it settle to baseline and printed the last strip. I dated it and filed it with the others. The audit was done, but something remained that was not on a form. The rule had held in all the places we consider authoritative: heart sounds, ECG, ultrasound, Doppler, gas, end tidal. The pleth, meant for pulse alone, had walked past the line and kept going. I wrote the second contradiction into my personal log before I left the unit near dawn. We had closed the chart at the correct time. We had saved every document that might be asked for later. The monitors had recorded their own traces to the central server, where someone could pull them months from now and review them with hindsight. By morning, the night looked clean on paper, but the pleth did not match the end. The morning sun lifted pale light through the NICU blinds as the day shift came in. They scanned the whiteboard, checked the ventilators, loaded syringes into pumps. The usual noise of an opening ward replaced the strange quiet of the night. I handed over the case without decoration. Resuscitation completed, cessation recorded, pleth anomaly documented, prints filed. I left the strips in a folder on the desk marked Incident to ensure they could not be lost to routine shredding. By midday, risk management had convened an internal review. They wanted to know if we had prolonged efforts beyond guidelines, if we had delayed cessation in search of something we should not have chased. I placed the timeline in front of them. Times, doses, gas results, ultrasound images, strip printouts, no gaps. The sequence was tight. Every action matched protocol until the point of cessation. What followed had been observation, not intervention. The head of service asked if the waveform could be venous. Venous artifact is the oldest explanation for rogue pleth activity. Sluggish flow, transmitted motion, nothing that means perfusion. I explained that the pattern had been regular, shaped like an arterial rise and fall, repeating across different limbs, surviving probe swaps, surviving relocation to the quiet room. Venous artifact is fickle. This trace had endurance. A biomedical engineer reviewed the monitor log file. No fault codes, probe integrity intact. The engineer suggested it was a software interpretation error, noise presented as signal. I asked why the error reproduced across sensors and locations. He did not answer, only shrugged. For the record, the entry became signal anomaly, artifact not excluded. The review ended with a decision: document, archive, no change to practice pending further cases. But in the hallway after, my supervisor caught my arm and asked if I was all right. I told her yes, but I knew the truth. I was not. Over the following week, I noticed how the story began to change in retelling. A resident said to a colleague that the monitor had glitched. Another nurse mentioned a phantom pleth with a half smile. The engineers referred to data drift. Each version made it smaller, more manageable, less heavy. But for me, the pleth strips were not drift. They were pulse waves that refused to match silence. The parents never knew about the anomaly. We shielded them from that layer. They had enough grief without being told that a machine, in its own language, had disagreed with the room. They buried their child within days. The death certificate recorded cardiac arrest, neonatal asphyxia. Clean lines, no contradiction. Weeks later, policy did shift quietly. The service added a line to the resuscitation protocol. Post-cessation monitoring must include a 5-minute pleth observation with printout. It was worded as a safeguard against artifact, a way to capture evidence that a line on a screen does not equal life. The change was dated and signed into practice. For me, the personal cost was subtler. On night shifts afterward, when resuscitations ended, I found myself reluctant to disconnect monitors. I watched longer than required, half waiting for a line to rise again where it should not. I never saw another trace like that nights, but the possibility lived in me. The contradiction followed me outside the unit. On the tram home, I replayed the sequence of steps: compressions, drugs, gas results, ultrasound silence, then the wave. The protocol had not failed. My actions had not failed. But the rule, the absolute that flat lines mean the end, had shown a crack. I began to keep copies of my own, Thermal paper curls in folders in my locker, sealed in plastic sleeves. They are artifacts the institution does not need, but I cannot discard. Sometimes, on long nights, I unfold one and look at the jagged line that should not exist. What unsettles me most is not the anomaly itself, but its persistence. A glitch should fade, noise should scatter. This trace lasted through checks, through relocations, through new probes, across minutes that felt like hours. It held on as if it were trying to be seen. I know what the textbooks say. I know what my ears heard, what the ultrasound showed, what the gas proved. The infant was gone. Yet the chart is not clean in my head. The chart says cessation at 0241. The strips say something else. That is why I still keep them. I tell myself it is discipline, not doubt, that someday another case may surface and someone will need to know we saw it before. But I also know I carry the waveform for another reason. Because once you have watched a device testify against silence, you cannot unknow it. And so the case remains closed in the records of the hospital, but open in me. The monitor drew a line across more than paper that night. It drew a line across my certainty, and it is not flattened yet.